Hey everybody, I tried to go live on FB, but that did not quite work. So I'm going to pre-record and then I will share it later on. But I was speaking on gender-based violence and manhood, and I said that my view is going to be a biblical one, and it's going to be a view that perhaps might be different to yours, but it is really just me giving a perspective, having worked with quite a few organizations in terms of men and what men are going through. So my name is Katleho, and I suppose a few titles that I hold, but none of that is important at the moment. What is though important is the fact that we've got to be able to address what is going on with men in South Africa at the moment and across the world, really. And one of the points that I was making in the previous live was that manhood is imbibed from other men. It's almost as though you would get it from the presence of other guys that are around you, that you value their opinion. And so therefore, because you value their opinion, you're going to want to be like them. You're going to want to say things like them. You're going to want to do things like them. And I said earlier that I don't think there's any man who goes and wants to abuse or goes and wants to hit and doesn't get some kind of tacit approval. And I think that that is where the issue lies, is that who has been giving the approval, who has been saying yes to men to go and brutally murder their partners, to rape, to kill, to abuse, to do all sorts of things, who has said yes where perhaps, God has said no. What is the voice that is inside of the man's head that allows him to be able to do the kind of things that he wants to do outside of what God would agree with and what God would want for him? And I'd said in the video earlier as well that it's quite important for us to note that the notion of providence and linking one's worth to possession or money is something that we've got to do away with, because in actual fact, we've got to understand that there's nothing that we can do despite our best efforts. Because how do we explain, and maybe let me complete the thought process, how do we explain someone who loses their job, and after having lost their job due to retrenchment and something that was completely out of their control, do we say that they failed to provide? What do we do with someone that gets into an accident and can no longer go to work? Do we say that they are failing to provide? Because you see, God is the provider and we are custodians. We therefore remain custodians of what he has provided. And because we remain custodians of what he has provided, therefore it then behooves us to be able to say, how do I take care? We must remember, again, garden in Eden, it is God that provides the garden. The man had nothing to do with it. And so this notion of provider, this notion of linking man and money has got to come to an end, because again, the earth is the Lord's, not man's, and the fullness thereof, the gold, the silver, the everything thereof. And so it is got to be that man has got to want to please God first, and then be a custodian of what it is that God has in store for him. But because we've allowed for men to think that money defines them, to think that possessions define them, we've made them to think that it's all about this money thing. Therefore, they want the power that comes with money. They want the dignity that comes with money. But actually, the kind of authority that they're looking for, actually, the kind of dignity that they're looking for is already inside them. And the question that has got to be asked is, who is lying to man? Who is saying yes to man when actually the answer is no? I think for me, what is quite critical for us to remember is that all men, all of us, have the propensity to abuse, have the propensity to kill, to maim, to rape, all of us. It's called sin. There is no man that can come and say that he doesn't have that propensity. And when we realize that, then we begin to understand that the problem is not just a mental one. It's not just a societal one, but it's spiritual at its core. Yes, there are those that say we shouldn't call this a demon. Yes, there are people who say that we should be able to say to men, hey, how are you doing this and what are you doing? But the problem is we've eliminated the spiritual genesis of a lot of things. And we're looking for sociological, we're looking for anthropological, we're looking for economic solutions to things that have a spiritual problem. It is licentiousness for a man to think that he can do anything and can get away with it. That's a spiritual problem at the core. It means that inside, the grounding that is necessary has not happened. Manhood, by its nature, biblically speaking, is defined by what you choose to not do and not what you choose to do. It is the manhood that God gives Adama to say, do not eat of the fruit. Lead in that regard. Don't eat of the fruit. But it is in him relinquishing that we developed a twisted manhood. A manhood that said, I can have everything I want and I can do anything I want. Well, that's actually boyhood. It is being a child. It is working on some kind of survivalist greed mentality. Where actually manhood ought to tell us that, no, I can't eat of that tree. But you see, if we remove spirituality from the equation, then what do we have to ground these men on? And that might be the problem, is that we're trying to find political, socio-political, economic solutions to a problem of a removed and absent spirituality. An absent man, a hollow man. Because we must understand that the man who understands his identity is found in God may struggle with the thought of rape, may struggle with the thought of abuse, but must understand that there are eternal consequences to his actions. It is not to say we absolve men just because they know God, just because Christ is their Lord and Savior. No. It is simply to say that there's got to be something deeper to our Christianity, to our belief system than just going to church. We've got to be able to address the issues that plague our community as men alone. What does manhood look like without women? Without the consistent need to impress them? Because we ought to be impressing God first and not them. Too many times we are acting as though the denial, the rejection of a woman is life-defining. It's not and can never be. Just because a woman said no to you doesn't mean your life has changed. When God says no to you, that's when life has got to change. Too much value has been placed on the approval from women. And men have got to redefine what it means to be men outside of women. Outside of what a woman is. Outside of the partner, outside of the girlfriend, outside of the wife. We've got to be able to go back to God and say, you created us first. What was in your mind? Where is my garden? What is it that you've called me to be a custodian over? And those are the questions that are going to get us to the place where we can understand that her rejection of you is simply just her saying no. It's got nothing to do with your identity. It's got nothing to do with your manhood. Your manhood is not defined by the rejection or acceptance of a woman. Because she may accept you today because you have the money. What happens tomorrow? She may accept you today because you have the things. What happens tomorrow? She may accept you today because you are powerful. But what happens tomorrow when there's another? Because power will constantly shift hands. But it is that kind of manhood that says no. That says I can't have everything. That says I don't want everything. That says I do have a type. That says her rejection of me is not God's rejection of me. But for that to happen, we've got to have that spirituality. We've got to have that connection with God. And that's what's missing from the debate. In my view, that's what's missing from the discourse, is that we're not getting to the place where we're able to say to the man, who are the people that have come before you? And what was God's promise to your family? And how are we dealing with that? What are you doing to ensure that you play your part in the family assignment, the generational mission that you have, that you are willing to give up on the generational mission because of a skirt? because of thighs, because of breasts, because of bums. That you look at the generational mission that God has given your family so lightly that you're willing to give it up for a kiss, for a night of passion. There are far more valuable things in life. And we've got to be able to get to the kind of manhood that celebrates what God says prior to the congratulations of women. And so, yes, you've got to be able to address that. You've got to be able to tell the men that are incarcerated at the moment that there is a value, an intrinsic value that you have outside of women. That your actions do not define you for the future. That yes, you may be in jail and will never leave there, but you can take charge of the fact as to whether your spirit is imprisoned as well. That there are men outside of jail who are applying to go to jail because that's the only kind of manhood that they think is existential to them or is important to them. We've got to be able to start educating men that spirituality grounds. We've got to start saying to men that don't drop your wife or girlfriend or sister off at church, go inside. If that's a church that wants to preach the truth, they should be able to preach the truth that David was both the guy that was after God's heart but an adulterer at the same time, that Moses was a liberator but a murderer at the same time. That this Daniel that we love so much disobeyed the king and obeyed God. That you must understand that Israel has a little bit of Jacob in him. That the parts of you that are not great are absolutely essential to the story and the message that God wants to bring about in your life. We've got to be able to teach men that it's okay to go to God and to say, I don't know what to do with this. Because you are not the be-all and end-all. The solutions should not come from you in the first place. If you're a custodian of what God has given you, God should be the place of origin for solutions. If God has given you that marriage, when it does not work anymore, go back to God. Unless you got it from people, then go to them. At some point, we've got to be able to educate men about a manhood that seeks God first. And not last, but first. Because the kind of manhood we want is the kind of manhood that looks at the tree that God says don't eat from and it doesn't. The kind of manhood we want is the kind of manhood that says to a woman, I like you, and if you don't like me, that's fine. My life is not going to change because you rejected me. My life is not going to change because you've said no to me, because what the society places as a premium on my life is not what is. I have intrinsic value. And that's the message that we need to begin preaching to men. That they have a value outside of the woman that they hold on their hands. That they have a value outside of the woman that they hold close to their hearts. That their value is not defined by the fact that they have the most prettiest or the most amazing woman in their lives. But that there is a manhood that can exist without women. We're not here to try and build a world where women exist by themselves or where women take revenge on all of these things. That's not going to help us either. But we need to build a world where men can be men without women. Where manhood is not reliant on husbandhood. You can be a man without a woman. You can be a man without a job. You can be a man and have responsibility because your first work is the generational mission that God has given your family. It's not in your wife. It's not in your children. It's not in the things you have. It's not in your money. It is in finding what is that generational assignment. And once we found it as men, we hold on to that. And once we've held on, we can be able to do the most amazing things. And so it is my prayer that men would dig deeper, that we would not be moved just by bums and breasts, but that we would be moved by God, that we would be moved to understanding who we are and what we are, because that is worth far more than just one night of pleasure. It is worth far more than us landing in jail trying to prove a manhood that God did not design.